हे गाइस, वेलकम बैक टू माय चैनल एसएलटी लर्निंग। एंड आज हम लोग बात करेंगे इंटरव्यू क्वेश्चंस ऑन एपीआई टेस्टिंग, राइट। दिस इज अ पार्ट 4 बिकॉज ऑलरेडी हमने क्यूए मैनुअल टेस्टिंग के लिए जो 3 पार्ट बनाए हैं उसमें हमने आई थिंक 24 क्वेश्चंस एंड आंसर कवर किए हैं फॉर मैनुअल टेस्टर। बट even though if you applying for a job as a fresher for a QA manual tester, nowadays API testing is too much demand. They will definitely ask you your experience or training experience in API testing. Okay, so these first 10 questions will really help you. I'm gonna make another 2 or 3 videos for API testing. I will try to cover 13 questions overall for API testing, but these are the first 10 questions that we're gonna cover in this particular video. So these are the like frequently asked question. I will just say is whenever you are applying for a QA role, right, and you want to showcase your experience in API, right. So these are the few basic things you should always keep it in mind, right. So let's we start with these questions one by one, and if you have any doubts, right, going through this tutorial, you can ping me out anytime, right. I will try to give you some more example and try to explain you in a better way for these particular things. So what is API, right, and give some example about the API. So whenever in interview, right, they will ask you, okay, what is API. So they definitely know, you know, the definition, but they also keen to know if you really understand the definition of API. And to understand that part, they will definitely ask you for the examples, right. So let me just tell you what is API. So the full form of the API will be the API program application programming interface, right. So as the name suggests, interface means it enabled uh, it, 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 it will be the bridge between the two application, right. If you want to transfer the data from one application to another application, you normally call the APIs for that applications. Sometimes API can be the internal API as well and the external API as well. Okay. So in a definition, if you consider in a simple word, right, API is the mechanism that enable two different software or two components of the same software to interact with each other by passing the request and response in HTTP mode, right. You can also have different mode of when you transfer the data, but this is the basic fundamental of API. Okay. So what are the different examples? So like in our mobile phone, smartphone, right, sometimes when we have the widgets about the weather information. So let's suppose if you are in a Bangalore, it shows the weather of Bangalore, right, when you turn on your internet. So that is coming from the weather forecasting API. Okay. Then we will have a Google map, right. So sometimes the application like I will just say Uber and Ola, they are using the Google Map API to showcase the distance between their start and endpoint for the customer, right. Then we will have a login API on many application, if you have seen, right. Whenever we try to go to any tutorial, or they will ask you about login via Facebook, login via Gmail, or login via LinkedIn, something like that way. So those kind of the example of the login APIs. Then we will have a payment API, right. If you are like booking something or placing order on any of the e-commerce website, nowadays we will have the pay via UPI or pay via PayPal or pay via, I will just say, in a XYZ portal. So those are the API from those specific payment gateway site. Okay. Then one of the most popular API we have in a travel agency, it's Trivago, right? And we have like we almost all know the Trivago. Like Trivago normally, I will just say, is the fetch the data from the different website like GoIbibo, Make My Trip, and Booking.com, and try to give you the rate of the same hotels in a different. I will just say based on their different pricing. So this is one of the example of the API, right? Trivago did not created anything. He just put the platform where he just fetched the API from the different already existing applications and try to display the data to the customer to make the decision. Okay. So API is something also help the people to save their time. Okay. So if something already available in market, you do not spend your time or use time and money to redevelop the same thing, you rather than you just purchase that things as per your requirement. Okay. So if somebody says what is API, explain like this way, and a few of the example, just give this example, real time example that you also came across in your day-to-day life. Okay. Then The next question will become, what is API and web service, or the difference between the API and web service, right? Now, when we just says web service and API, they almost similar, right? The only difference is there, web services work over the internet, over the network, right? And the API can be within a network or over the internet. Okay, so that is the reason all APIs are not a web service, because few of the API could be the internal, right? Where all the web service are APIs. Okay, so understand this different. When you are interacting with for two application internally or externally, that is called API. But when you're going externally, right, when I just says internal or external, means over the internet, over the network, that will also call as a web service. Okay, web service API. So that is the reason web service is a API, but it will work over the internet. Okay, API supports HTML, XML, JSON, and many other format, right? Where the web service only support XML format. So in second one, like when we just say is the we are only following the XML format, that is the web service, because we have to transfer the data over the internet. Okay. Now XML, that means it used the SOAP protocol, right? Simple Object Access Protocol, to transfer, send, and receive the data, where in API we can normally use any format, right? Because it's an architectural view, right? So we can use JSON, text file, or anything to transfer the data, or to send or receive the data. API can be offline or internal. Our web service always work over the internet, okay, over the network. So when we just say we have one application, right? Let's suppose e-commerce application. So in e-commerce application we have order management, right? So we have an internal API like create order and update order. So that is not gonna work on any other application or over the internet. That is just for specific module. We have two API, create order and update order. So that is also called a API. Okay, but when we create an order and when we want to update the order, we need to go over the internet. We need data from different applications. That will become the web services. Okay, so this four line of difference, that is more than enough. But if you just speak this word, right, web service always work over the internet or over the network, they will understand that you have a concept clear between the difference between the API and the web services. Okay, guys. Then we will have another questions like, what is URI and endpoint in API, right? So if you see on your screen, right, I have put the Microsoft API to fetch the list of users, right? So URL plus API, that will become URI, Uniform Resource Identifier, right? So this is the definition you can give, right? And you all know the URL, right? What could be the URL? And endpoint, that means the at the end, whatever the API specifications we have, like create user, get a list of user, update user, something like that way, that is called endpoint, right? And overall, if you combine everything, URL plus endpoint, that will become the API call. So this is normally the structure you can see in a Microsoft, right? They have also put the API version 1.0. If they will update this API, let's suppose 2.0, they will update this information over here. So this is how the API call look like. Okay, the endpoint will come at the end, which will specify the actual operation that is gonna happen, right? URL will be something mainly refer to the server area, right, where we have placed this API. And sometimes we have versioning or subfolder as well in a API call. Okay, so what is URI? URI is nothing, just a unique, or I will just say uniform resource identifier, right? So if you want to see this is the endpoint for a user, get user. If you want to say the endpoint for a create user, then the line till version 1.0 will remain the same. Only the endpoint will get changed. Create user, update user, delete user, something like that way. Okay. So endpoint is the last part of the API call, which aim to perform certain action or give the easy understanding to the user. Now we have API, we have two types, right? REST and SOAP, right? So this will definitely, they will ask you what is REST or what is SOAP, right? So most of the application nowadays we developed are follow the REST API structure. Okay, so it is the full form. Let's always different start with the full form, representative state of transfer, and that is simple resource access protocol. Okay, sorry, It's not a simple resource, it's a simple object access protocol, guys. I just have a typo over here. It is architectural view. Okay, when we talk about rest, it is a architectural view, means it could be the follow the client server format, it could be the stateless, it could be the cacheable layered system or uniform interface. Where in a SOAP, it is designed including the WSDL, means Web Services Designing Language file, and that file will have the XML format which contain all the information that disclose few information to the end user as well, right? Including the locations of the web service and what is the use of the web service. Okay, REST API can make a use of SOAP protocol, but SOAP protocol cannot make a use of the REST API because SOAP itself a defined protocol. Okay, SOAP expose the data sometimes in a WSDL file, web service designing language files, because it has to provide some of the mandatory information to make the web service workable. Where in a REST, we use uniform service locator, right? So we do not provide all the data, right? We only pass the data in an endpoint, and we do not disclose other information about the API. So in terms of the security, I will just say REST is more secure than SOAP. Okay, REST required less bandwidth in a user in term of the uses compared to the SOAP, where SOAP required more bandwidth compared to the REST. Okay, that is the difference. Now SOAP only support the XML format, and if you just says XML format, that is similar to the web services, where REST supports different format like plain text, XML, HTML, and JSON, and all those things. Okay, so these are the, I will just say five difference, right? Six difference, but you can just pick 3 to 4 lines, that is more than enough. Okay, SOAP mainly defined for the web services who work over the internet, and REST will be the API call that could be the internal or external. So guys, always start with the I will just say the full form of the wording, like REST and SOAP. Then tell about few things about the, always use this line WSDL, web services designing language. If you use this word, they will understand you have the knowledge about these things. Okay, so this is how you should explain the difference between the REST and SOAP. If you have any questions, if you need more example, I will just suggest try to get one example of both of them, but that will remain always the same. Yeah. Now they will ask you like this question, like most of the time when I ask the fresher, right, have you worked on API testing? Then they will afraid to say yes, because they might be think it gonna be more questions about API, right? But guys, always says yes, I have the basic knowledge of API, because nowadays whenever company are hiring, they want the person to know the API. Okay, because most of the applications nowadays have a API. I will just say in their application. Okay, when they develop. So always just answer your question like this way. Yes, in my training they have given me a hands-on on API testing using a Postman tool. Okay, and what is the Postman tool and how it's work? Like I have already created the video for that one. So this API testing, if you go on this one, right, you will see the basic from the Postman, how to start, how to install, and everything. Then how to use environment variable, and how to call, and how to put the validations. You see, this is the test validations. So everything I have explained in a detailed way. So just go through this video. This two video will more than enough, right? Then come up with this interview questions and answer list. Okay, then just says yes, then just give some like just format your answer in such a way like I used to do the practice on different open source API like weather API to fetch the weather postcard based on the city name. Then I played with the couple of API to perform the CRUD operation for end-to-end testing, right? Post, put, get, delete, call. And then there is one dummy project they have created for us to practice. So I helped a developer to create the API documentation as well, because when you create a API documentation, that means you know everything about APIs, right? How API work. So in API documentation, mainly we will have a API endpoints, request payload, like expected response data, response code, sample format of request, list of expected response based on the different data. So these are the few things we normally mention in an API documentation, and I used to be a part of that creation, so I know how to create a API documentation. If they ask you where you create this documentation, that says as of now we have created in a Word format, but we know We can also use the Swagger for online to maintain our APIs format for documentation. Okay, so Swagger is one of the tool where you can document your API, including all required information. What is the use of it? How the endpoints going to be work? What will be the sample request payload? What could be the expected response if you pass this detail? So Swagger, you can always remember that name. That will also help you in the interview. Okay. Now, this is the common questions, right? What are the different API calls that you are aware? So, at the initial level, they do not expect you to know all the advanced level of API calls. To just speak about these things, and for this API call, I have also given the SQL relevance, right? How the SQL query, the database query will be work on this API call, right? So, post means you create a resource that similar to the insert a new record to the table. Then get means you retrieve the data from the application, right, to get the information based on the resource ID on the endpoint. So it's similar to the select star or select xyz column in a table. Then put will help you to replace the resource, right? Over here it's similar to update the data, but over here it will not update the few of the information. It will completely update the old record with the new record, right, based on the parameters you have passed. Then patch, it's something used for a partial update. So when they will in next question we will discuss in detail. So in a patch it will be the partial update based on the few of the column or few of the parameters you want to update. Delete, that means delete the resource. You need to provide the resource ID to delete it from the applications or from the software. That is similar to delete from table where parameter passed we have. Okay, so just speak about this for call, because these are the for call normally include the CRUD operations, and that help you to do the end-to-end testing. Okay, so create means post, get the data means get, update the data means put, and delete the data for delete. Okay, CRUD operation, you always remember these things. Now the next question they will ask you, what is the difference between put and patch, right? So both will used to do the update, right? Update the record of the whatever the resource ID you provide. But always remember, if you use this word, put call used to replace the entire resource detail, replace, right? That means they know you know the concept clear. Where the patch call is used to update the field information, right? Not entire resource, just update the few things about that specific resource. Put call required more bandwidth because it's gonna update the entire resource detail, where patch call required less bandwidth. Create a resource by replacing old resource, right? So this will create an, I will just say not a create actually, but it will create a new resource body, because ID will remain the same, but the all other information will get changed. In a patch it will not create a new resource, it just update the existing resource. Okay, let's suppose if you are following the put call, right, and you are providing the ID of any customer to replace the data, right? So what will happen in these situations? If ID is found in a database, it will replace the data. If ID is not found, then it will create a new resource with that ID and data. Understand over here, if id is there in database, it will replace the data. If id do not found, then it will create a new data, new resource with that new id and data. Okay, where in a patch call, what will happen if you pass the id, right? If it is found the id, then it will update the required data. If it does not find the id, that means it will show the error message that this id do not found. It will not create a new data or new resource with the new id and data. Okay, so this is the basic difference, guys. Use word replace. Put call used to replace the entire resource detail. If you use this word, that will make you a good sense in an interview. Okay, an interview will know, okay, you know the concept clear. What is API header, what is API payload, and what is API parameter? Okay, so API header would be the request header, which used to provide the required information to process the I will just say API request. If you see, right, if you go to the Postman, right, so you will have this option over here, headers, right? So these are the different headers we have, right? Like content type, authorizations, right? If you want to pass any API key, so those kind of headers you can see it over here. Okay, so I'm just clicking on this one. You see, these are the different headers we have, right? So user agent type, Postman token if you want to pass, and all those things. So this is the one of the part of the header. And what are the examples? Like if you want to identify the version, data sent in a JSON, right? API key we want to pass for authorization, response cache or cookies information, that is called the API headers. And that values will always come in a key value pair, right? So this is key and this is the value, this is key and value. Okay. So what is API header? It's a request header that help to provide the required information to process the API. Now, what is API payload? Right? Sometimes is what is payload? The payload means extra information that we send during a API call. Right? It could be the pass in a body over here. So whatever the information we pass over here, that is become the payload. Okay. So you see in a raw file we can have text, JSON, HTML, XML format to pass the information over here. So that is the become the payload for this API. Okay. So different API will have a different payload over here. Now, and what is the parameters? So parameters, that means, let me just show you on this one. Okay. You see the parameters means page 2. So over here, whatever the information we want to include in a URL itself, that is called the parameters. Okay. And that parameter helps to achieve the like to help the API to execute the information in key value pair. Okay. So that is called the API parameters. So headers will be something that we define over here. Bodies means payload we define over here. These are the parameters which get automatically linked with the URL when you pass. Let's suppose if I just say test, you see over here automatically it just says and test, and value will be 123. You see the value is showing over here. So this is how the parameter works. If I uncheck this one, it will disappear from over here. So this is called the API parameters. Okay. Now, what is the difference between payload and body then, right? Sometimes they will ask you what is API body. So payload, that means content, right? That is the part of the representation of data. How you want to represent the data in term of the passing the information in a body, right? Where I will just say the API body, that means it will contain the data including the part of the different messages, right? The data and metadata. That means if any warning message that you want to compare, or any error message you want to compare, successful message you want to compare, those information can be passed under the body over here. Okay, in any format like binary or this text format, JSON format, or any format over here. So that is the key difference between the API payload and API body. But in other terms, they are almost similar. If you want to consider, they are almost similar. What is a payload and what is the API body? Okay. So far these are the questions that we have covered. So let's we go to the next questions. So the next question they will definitely ask you this one: what are the different HTTP response code or the API response code that you have come across in your working? Okay, so these are the information, like if the code will start from the 100 or 1xx, that means information response code, right? If it is 2xx, this means successful response code. If it is a 3xx, that means redirectional messages. And if it is 4xs, that means client error messages. And if it is 5xs, that means server error response. Okay, so few of the response code that I have put over here, like 200, that means everything is okay, right? So most of the time when you want to validate the API, we normally validate the response code. Okay, if you are creating any object, it just says 201 object is created. If you are for 202 means accepted, 204 means no content. The similar way, 301 means move permanently. The API call or the file that you are trying to access, it has been moved from permanently from that locations. 302 means not found, right? The API call that you are trying to redirect is not found. 304 means not modified after your operations, after your put or patch operations. If there is no change in API, right, with some error, it says not modified. 308 means permanent redirect, right? So that particular things has been moved permanently from X API to Y API, okay, or X endpoint to Y endpoint. Then most of the time they will ask you about 4xx and y 5xx related code. Means for OO means bad request. If in your API, right, you are passing the parameter, you are passing the payload, right, and you have not configured the body or configured the parameter in a correct way, that time it will give you the for o error, means bad request. 401 means unauthorized, right? That concept we will check in the next particular slide. What is 401 and 403? 402 means payment required. If you are working on payment gateway related things, then you will normally see this particular error message. 404 means page not found or resource not found, right? You are trying to access the space where there is nothing is configured, so at that time we will see the 404. 500 that are related with the server's error response code. If something is not good in a server or some server is not reachable, it will normally give you the 5 axis related error, right? So internal server error, it will be the 500. 501 means not implemented. 502 means bad gateway error. 503 means server service unreachable. So when you work on any applications where require the multiple services, right, and if the services is stopped, right, or service is like after the upgrade, the developer has forgot to restart the services, at that time you normally see the 503. Then 504 gateway timeout. Most of the times when you have the report server, right, and you try to run a huge report which contain too many data, so at that time you normally see the gateway timeout error from the server 504. Okay, so explain few of the response code. Always keep in mind few of the response code, because when they talk about API they will definitely talk about these things. Okay, then the next question, like what is authentications and what is authorizations? That is similar to the response code 401 and 403. Okay, so authentications means something that will validate the identity, right? And authorization, that is something after validating the identity, do you have permission to access or not, right? So like we have the role, right? We have a different roles, right? In an application, like we have a login will remain for all, right? Admin user, the normal user, the customer. So three user will have logins, that is, that will define the identity. But after login, what kind of menus or sub menus they can access, that will define by the authorizations. Okay, so authentication is always done before the authorizations, and authorization always done after the authentications. Like ID token, right? Entry gate of office. When you are entering to the office, you normally biometrics your thumbs, or you normally swap the card, right? That is the entry gate to the office, which will remain common for all, right? Now suppose you want to get an entry on a server area, right? So at that time your card maybe not work, because it requires special permission. You are forbidden to access that specific area. That means only the senior IT person can access the server gate or go into the server room to do the modifications. So that is called the access token. Okay, to access the specific things on a application. So what are the example of authentications? The password based authentication, single sign on. Nowadays most of the times we see the single sign on. Then social authentications we have. And what are the different types of authorizations? Role based authorization, then locations, right? Sometimes we have the big application, like if you are working with, like we which has the many countries involved, right, or many cities involved. So based on the location you cannot access the data from one country of data to another country. So location based authorization. Then we have OAuth, right? That will again come with a different pair of key and value. So those are the things we normally come into the mind when we talk about the authentication and authorization. Okay, so response code 401 is stand for bad authentication, and 400 for 403 will depend on unauthorization information. Okay, so if they will ask you about the difference for a response code 401 or 403, you can always speak like this way. That is totally fine. Okay, authentication and authorization. So hope guys this video will help you to understand the few things about the API. Few of the concept are clear, right? But if you still struggle to understand like how this exactly work in a postman side, right? I have already created these videos, so I will suggest you just go through these two videos. Then again we have the few videos from the Raghav, or the one of the finest tutorial Raghav. You can also refer the end-to-end API testing. But in my future video I'm also going to create more video about the API testing, so you can refer those videos as well. Okay, and if you are a fresher, if you want to higher chance to get the placed, right, you can refer my this playlist, right, about interview question and answer. I'm going to place this video in this particular list, part 3, and this is the part 4 for API testing. And if you want to learn the completely everything about the manual testing from scratch. If you're a non-IT person, then and also you can refer this particular my all 11 videos. Will have all the concept clear. I have explained everything on a, I will just say in a uh, I will just say in a MS Paint really clearly way, so it will be help you as well. So try to have these videos. I have initially I have not published this one, but I have make it available for public as well. Initially it was hold it privately, so now you can refer these videos as well. Okay guys, and if you have any questions, or you are stuck in somewhere in your interview, right, or you are applying for a job, you are not getting a job, for a QA at least, right, for QA manual and automation, try to reach me out. I will try to help you in a right manner. Okay, so if you like my video, just subscribe to my channel, share this video to the other learners so they can get the knowledge about the API testing and the software QA side. Okay, thank you.